So we're going to do another example of quarters, nickels, and dimes types problem. So here we have quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies in our pocket. It tells us there's twice as many dimes as there are quarters, half as many nickels as there are quarters, and one more penny than there are quarters. They give us the total of the coins are $2.92. How much do we have? So the first thing we always need to do is define our variable. So the question at the end will always help us define our variable. We need to figure out how many is probably more appropriate. How many of each coin do we have? And that can help us figure out how much. So we need to figure out the number of quarters, the number of dimes, the number of nickels, and the number of pennies. And again, once we know how many, we can figure out how much, same thing. So we have too many variables, though. We cannot use 4 different variables for one equation. So we always need to go back and evaluate which one would we want to know first, which one would help us find all the other ones. What we can see here is when they describe the dimes, they use the quarters. I can use a different color. When they describe the nickels, they also use the quarters. And finally, when they describe the pennies, they also use the quarters. So if I knew what the quarters were, I could figure out all 3 of them. So let's call X the number of quarters. So then dimes, well, there's twice as many. So that'd be 2X. The nickels, it says there's half as many. So it'd be half of the number of quarters. And the number of pennies is 1 more. So it'd be the number of quarters plus 1 is what it would add up to. So from there, what we know is how much money we have, right? So we talked about the total money that we have. Well, that's going to come from the quarters plus the dimes plus the nickels plus the pennies. But specifically, it's the money from the dimes, the money from the quarters, the money from all of these. So if we had $2.92, I know each quarter is worth 25 cents. But how many do I have? I don't know. I have X many of them. Same thing with the dimes. I know that each dime is worth 10 cents, but I don't know how many I have, so I called it 2X. When it comes to the nickels, I know that each nickel is worth 5 cents, but I don't know how many I have, so I would have to multiply by what I called the number of nickels, which is 1/2 X. And then finally, the number of pennies. Well, I know that each penny is 1 cent, and I know that I have X plus 1 of them. So I can distribute and combine like terms, so I have 0.25X plus 0.2X, and it's okay if you're using your calculator to use this multiplication, plus 0.025X, right? On my calculator, I'm just figuring out what is half of 0.05. And then finally, we distribute this to both terms. So 0.01X, and then 1 times 0.01 is obviously itself, plus 0.01. So we can combine all of our X's. And again, it's okay to use a calculator to make sure you don't mess up the decimal, 0.25. So that gives me a total of 0.485 X's. And then we have this plus 1 cent at the end. So if we wanted to get the X's alone, we'd have to get rid of this plus by subtraction. And then from there, what we can do is divide to get X alone. And when we do that, that gives us the answer of 6. Now 6 is just X, right? We need to answer all our original questions. How many of each do we have? So if X was the number of quarters, that's clear to see we have 6. Well, if I had to do 2 times the number of quarters to get dimes, that'd be 12 dimes. Half of 6 is 3, so I have 3 nickels. And then 1 more than 6 is 7. And of course, we can check on our calculator. If we take 6 quarters and add it to 12 dimes, and then 3 nickels and 7 pennies, that should give us $2.92. So 6 quarters plus 12 dimes, 3 nickels, and 7 pennies. And on my calculator, I'm just typing that in, and I get 2.92. So we know we're correct.